Hey guys, I'm going to be reacting to this video because it's been on the back burner for me for a long time. I found it in my recommended and I just sort of put it off because I knew I wanted to make a video on it. But yeah, first time reaction to Analyzing Evil, Dave Filoni from Disney Lucasfilm. Here we go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second plagiarized episode of Analyzing Evil,
Second one?
featuring Dave Filoni from Lucasfilm. Now, unlike fictional characters, people who exist in real life can have vastly differing opinions on them. While most can say that Emperor Palpatine, for example, is pure evil, the opinion on Dave Filoni has never been set in stone. He undoubtedly still has his supporters for different reasons, as he has his haters for different reasons.
Well, yeah, a lot of people see him as the savior of Lucasfilm because there's a vast majority of the fandom that, or maybe not a vast majority, but there's a subsection of the fandom that disagrees with Kathleen Kennedy and the way that she's handling Star Wars, and they look at Dave Filoni because of Clone Wars and Rebels and Bad Batch as this savior figure, which I don't know if he's necessarily that, but I do like the stuff that he makes.
However, Dave Filoni from the perspective of an expanded universe fan, and those generally against Disney Star Wars, is looked at unfavorably, while more casual fans and people who are indifferent or already like the current state of things tend to have a more favorable opinion of the man. It's also worth noting that Dave Filoni's status as a major villain of the Star Wars franchise in the real world did not pick up until around the 2020s. While there was some distaste for the man during 2008 to 2013, it did not become a widespread hatred until the early 2020s. Early Dave Filoni hate could be largely attributed to the demographic of expanded universe fans. But then he started pissing off more and more demographics of Star Wars fans.
Okay, I know where he's going to go with this. So, with the latest stuff Dave Filoni's done, he's come out with certain episodes of Star Wars shows that decanonize some of the novels, which I said it in my most recent video, but the novels are not canon, and I'm tired of Lucasfilm pretending that they are.
That eventually, they all came to detest him. Dave Filoni is the case of someone whose bad practices ultimately caught up with him in public perception, but by then, his success as a Lucasfilm employee outweighed that downside. Now, before we can look at where Dave Filoni is now, we must first look at his origins. Born on June 7th, 1974, in Pennsylvania, Filoni entered the entertainment industry in 1997 as a storyboard artist or an assistant director in many shows.
He was working on SpongeBob.
His credits include Mike Judge's King of the Hill, Disney animated shows such as Timo Supremo and Kim Possible, and also came to work on directing many first season episodes of Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender. Then he was offered a job by George Lucas that he seized to work on the animated show that would come to be known as Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Although it is worth noting that this is Dave Filoni's own account of what happened. There's actually the possibility that George didn't actually hire him at all. According to an issue of Star Wars Insider from back in the day, Catherine Winder actually claimed credit for hiring him. Now this is where the agreements on Filoni's career and how it's seen stops. Since Dave Filoni is most commonly associated with Star Wars today, there is no agreement on what happened exactly with the Clone Wars. While there are many featurettes, it's worth noting that just because...
Well, there are some disagreements. I know there's a lot of people that don't like that Ahsoka survived. She thinks she should have died in Order 66. A lot of people don't like the chips in the clones because that wasn't originally an idea. But Dave Filoni just had his own way of like weaving things into the show to make it more interesting, and I think it worked out.
Because Dave Filoni or anyone else tells us something doesn't automatically make it verifiably true. The Clone Wars, after all, was cited to not contradict the events of the previous Clone Wars show, something that became objectively false. So what happened exactly is anyone's guess. Filoni's defenders do like to put a lot of the Clone Wars' bad decisions on George Lucas. The pacifist Mandalorians, Darth Maul's return, Ahsoka's original conception are all given to George Lucas. However, it's subject to heavy debate who had more influence over the Clone Wars. What is for certain, however, is that Dave Filoni, in everything he's been involved in, has had next to no regard for continuity, not just from the works of other people, but himself as well. However, it is most egregious that he paved over others. Whether George Lucas paved over the expanded universe, Filoni was complicit in that. While George may get the excuse that he's the god of Star Wars, Filoni does absolutely not. He, however, has acted like he has the authority to pave over everyone, even with George out of the picture. This mentality may have developed either because George let him do it, or he was simply too lazy to adhere to other people's work by nature of the kind of writer that he is. Overriding other people's work is common in different franchises. Fallout as an example...
And it's also common in Star Wars. Like, the first ever Star Wars movie to come out, just Star Wars. Right after that, there was a novel called Splinter in the Mind's Eye that was a sequel to Star Wars. Empire Strikes Back comes out and completely decanonizes that novel. It's been happening forever. After Return of the Jedi, there was an entire trilogy on Thrawn. They made an entire backstory of what the Clone Wars was like, and then the prequels come out, and that completely is out the window. Dave Filoni is not the one that started this. This has been happening forever.
Has a fan base split mostly because of continuity errors in the contrast between Interplay's Fallout and Bethesda's Fallout, Bethesda being the ones who inherited the franchise. While that is a discussion for another day, there are others like Dave Filoni, who are simply not interested in working with others, and feel like they should be in charge of a franchise they did not create. But unlike Bethesda and Fallout, Dave Filoni has had more success in his endeavors, to the point where criticisms of his practices were secondhand at best. And this can be attributed to one key factor: accessibility. Most of what Dave Filoni retconned is something that either happens in the novels or comics, both of which require the ability to read extensively. Even if comic books are easier to read than novels, they still require extensive reading skills.
The novels are placeholders. There, I said it. The point of the novels is to tell stories that are placeholders for events until a movie or a show tells the story. Like, the Clone Wars, the last 4 episodes, they decanonized the Ahsoka novel. But I'd argue that the events in the Clone Wars finale were much better than the Ahsoka novel. I know not everybody agrees with that, but it's up for debate.
It's not the same as watching a movie or television show. Dave Filoni, however, had the advantage over the stories he retconned because he was making a television show, something that people are far more likely to watch than reading the Thrawn trilogy onwards, for example. And while reading comics is naturally easier, they're still books, and thus would be read on a similar level to novels. You'd specifically have to go to a comic book shop to know that they existed back when the internet was in its infancy, meaning that a lot of great stories were swept under the rug. Even with the highly accessible Clone Wars micro-series, people either didn't watch it or saw Dave Filoni's show as more of a successor than a sequel. Dave Filoni probably couldn't get away with what he did without majority support for the longest time. Filoni heavily relied on those who don't know squat about the expanded universe or don't really care about consistency to sell his shows. Defenses range from how the expanded universe was never canon, commonly citing out-of-context lines from George Lucas, or ignoring the ones in favor of the EU, arguing that nobody even reads the books anyway, so who cares, or even saying something like how Filoni's work improves what came prior. The last argument I mentioned is probably the pivotal reason the Clone Wars even has a following to begin with. It contradicts the prequels, a trilogy that certain people hated.
I'm curious to hear what he has to say about this, but I never viewed the Clone Wars as contradicting the prequels. To me, it enhanced the prequels. Because for any of you guys that are like crazy prequel fans, I have a challenge for you. Just sit through the first 3 movies, like Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, or Revenge of the Sith, without a phone or food. Just watch all 3 of them, and I guarantee you'll get bored halfway through the second movie. Those first 2 movies are slow.
They praise the Clone Wars not for making the prequels better, but because the Clone Wars warped the prequels into something entirely different.
No.
Even if we have a look at the Clone Wars, it took a season at best to pick up, and there were a lot of duds. And while it's fine to mention highlights, the Clone Wars was far from a great show. It might be decent at best, but its problems are far too great to ignore. However, as we soon see, Dave Filoni doubled down on any bad practices he acquired from the Clone Wars, and in fact he went straight to work on a sequel series to the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and here the flaws are even more prominent. Even though the budget was cut in half, Filoni proves he is not a strong independent showrunner or writer. He's also blatantly lied that the Lasats were a brand new species in a featurette. Star Wars Rebels as a show was generic and cookie cutter as it comes. Most of the series is bland, it pulls punches all the time, and any dramatic stuff happens at the very, very end. Not to mention the villains are utterly incompetent. During this time, he also implied that he very much sees Expanded Universe fans as fussy children, as when asked if he'd bring in more Expanded Universe characters after doing so with Thrawn, he made such a comparison, telling fans to quote, "play with Thrawn for a little bit." This tells us that his confidence in what he's doing is extremely high, and that means, undoubtedly, that he has traits of narcissism, at least when it comes to writing Star Wars. Not enough people either knew or cared.
The thing is, like, I'm not the biggest Expanded Universe, like, fan. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I played the Force Unleashed games and a little bit of KOTOR, but I don't think the average Clone Wars viewer cares about the Expanded Universe at all. I don't care. I don't think the average Star Wars fan cares. I think they're just watching to be entertained. And it doesn't mean they can't bring in stuff from the Expanded Universe every now and then. It's just, I don't know. Some characters in the Expanded Universe shouldn't be canon.
About his dismissive regard for continuity. And aside from George Lucas, Dave Filoni has quite possibly been literally the only creator that people have ever known. Everyone else be damned. Filoni, after all, not only has the advantage of accessibility, but also prominence in that accessibility. The Clone Wars is probably the first show most people start with, and when we look at all the Star Wars shows that exist on Disney+, Filoni is cited as the creator of almost half of them. He also has major influence over practically all shows that come out, due to his status. Leslie Headland has openly stated how she sees Filoni as a mentor, and apparently he said that not all witches were Night Sisters, which the irony of that being that Filoni himself ignored the courtship of Princess Leia, which established the different Dathomirian tribes. So we can also say with good reason that he also enjoys being the lore consultant when it comes to Star Wars, because even if he isn't directly involved with something, he at least has his input established so that they don't override him. But that's only so he can do the overriding. I should also mention Filoni's symbol as a false source of hope.
See, not to be hard on the book fans, but the books don't matter. Like, historically in Star Wars, they have never mattered. Like, he's not the first one to trample over the books. It's been going on forever.
Hope for desperate fans. Some people act like Filoni is a spy in the industry and that he's going to give us real Star Wars once he's usurped Kathleen Kennedy. But the reality is far from that. But this sort of belief still allows Filoni to thrive. And as I said before, it's far too late. I should also say that just like the man himself, his flagship character is highly overrated. Ahsoka Tano is commonly considered to be Filoni's main character, and a key way he imposes his will on Star Wars is through her. Since George Lucas's original saga is about Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka is given an artificial spot in that story. But over time, Ahsoka went from an afterthought shoehorned between episodes 2 and 3 to a character of major importance, however artificial it is. Filoni, as many will know, went behind George's back to ensure Ahsoka survived Season 5 of the Clone Wars. And even with the acquisition by Disney, he was able to double down on Ahsoka's so-called relevance. He made her a central character in Rebels, gave her a live-action debut in The Mandalorian, and even topped it off with a Disney Plus show that's probably going to get a second season anyways. Ahsoka as a character does not work in the Star Wars saga for a simple reason. She wasn't in the Star Wars saga to begin with. The Clone Wars was designed to make her artificially fit into a story she was never a part of. And say what you will about George's input, but at least he understood that having Ahsoka live past Revenge of the Sith would be a terrible mistake. This ultimately demonstrates that Filoni doesn't care about the Star Wars universe and its consistency, but rather, he cares about how he can warp the franchise to his will and make it his. In Star Wars terms, Filoni would absolutely be a dark side user, as that's what it's about: selfish desires and the pursuit of greater power above all else. Filoni has let his ambition and selfish desires cloud any sense of integrity, and in doing so, doomed the Star Wars franchise. When we look at Filoni's fans, a common theme between all of them is that they're heavily influenced by what he made, and have next to no experience with the works of others, aside from maybe George Lucas. I also tend to notice that it's the Clone Wars he's mostly praised for.
The reason a lot of fans like Dave Filoni, the ones that enjoyed the prequels, is because Dave Filoni worked directly under George Lucas. Like, there are a lot of people that see Dave Filoni as like the closest thing that we have to George Lucas. Like, he is the stuff that he's making is sort of what they think George Lucas would do, which I don't think is necessarily true. But on the Ahsoka stuff, I think she's a cool character. I think it's fine she survived the original trilogy. It's weird, but like, it's fine.
Except he hasn't even directly written any good episodes. The only thing he's written that people consider to be a banger is the series finale, The Siege of Mandalore. But when you stop to think about it, the series is contrived, poorly written, and Filoni doesn't care about continuity, as he both retcons the Ahsoka novel and his own show, Star Wars Rebels. This actually sparked a lot of Disney canon novel readers to criticize Filoni for doing this. Not to mention he did it again with The Bad Batch and Tales of the Jedi. Speaking of, it's commonly agreed that Filoni was, or should have been, well aware of the comics of the same name. And
George Lucas did it too. Once again, like, with the prequel trilogy, George Lucas was inconsistent with the originals. There's a ton of things that just don't make sense. Like, why does R2 never mention that he knows Obi-Wan and stuff like that? It's not a Dave Filoni issue. It's been going on forever. Like, a lot of the complaints this guy has for Dave Filoni aren't Dave Filoni issues. They're universal Star Wars issues.
Also in poor taste, since one of the writers of said comic book series, Tom Veitch, had passed away mere months before then. Of course, Filoni has made next to no public comment about this. Filoni is perfectly willing to steal other people's creations without credit, but also paves over them without care. And ultimately, this paints the road to an absolutely selfish writer, who doesn't even see his own work as sacred, since he's willing to pave over even himself. A writer with this little care is extremely unlikely to give out a quality product, and it shows. Most of Filoni's shows have been mediocre at best, terrible at worst. In fact, the one show that most of everyone agrees is bad is Star Wars Resistance, and is brushed under the rug with his fans pretending he had next to nothing to do with it. So that's Dave Filoni, an incompetent, selfish writer, who doesn't even care about his own work when it's time to move on to the next thing. We don't know how Filoni's streak at Lucasfilm will end, so there may be more evil to be unleashed by this egomaniac. So just keep that in mind. But to sum up this video, Filoni is an arrogant writer, careless for the works of others, even George Lucas and himself, who sees to make Star Wars his own. And unfortunately, the backlash for the man came over a decade too late. And now there's nothing we can do. Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Evil. What do you think about Filoni? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Okay, so this guy very much has a vendetta against Dave Filoni. Like, he's very much biased in his opinion. You can tell throughout the video. I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to his opinion. I'm just saying that he didn't so much approach it with both sides in mind. He came at it like very much hating the guy. But I think Dave Filoni's great. I like the Clone Wars. I think Rebels is fine. Bad Batch is great. I'm enjoying Ahsoka. I'm looking forward to see what he does next. But the common thing that I'm seeing with Dave Filoni is the people that hate him really, really like the books. But once again, the books do not matter, and they've never mattered. Lucasfilm has never cared about the books. There have been books coming out between all the Star Wars material forever, and the next thing has always decanonized them. That is a fact. That has just always been happening. Just look at the Thrawn trilogy and the Clone Wars, and as soon as the prequels came out, everything that the Thrawn trilogy of books by Timothy Zahn said about the Clone Wars is just completely gone. It's been happening forever. So, yeah, great video. I'll link it in the description. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed.